Hello everyone, I'm Dan, I work here at CSPS. Thanks again for coming to Synth Group. Anyone's first time? Nick's first time. Everyone else has pretty much been here, so you kind of know the deal. Tonight we got a lot of cool stuff. Got the Analog Four from Elektron, which Jason will be doing demonstration of filters. The Juno 106. Patrick will be showing us different features and presets from that. And then Kent will do the final performance on the VCV rack, which is a virtual modular. I'm super excited about that because I know cost is usually prohibitive to a lot of gear, but if you have free software that does the same thing, pretty awesome. So I think we're all good to go. I guess have Jason come up here and get started with filters. I'll be running sound and oscilloscope.
Yep.
Make sure everything looks good. At any point, feel free to interrupt and ask a question.
Absolutely.
If anything comes up, I'll kind of interject as I need to. So, yeah, turn it over to Jason.
All right.
Let's give it up.
Happy to be here in a demo role and as opposed to a host role. We're trying to have everyone experience different things in terms of hosting, doing demos, doing performances. So it's nice to be a demonstrator tonight, I guess would be the noun. This first performance, or this first demo, is part of our Synth Basics section, which is covering just something very simple with synthesis for people who are either brand new to electronic music or synthesizers. Which we've got our diehard enthusiast who Ben, who is been at every show and eager to learn. So I appreciate that. And also, I find it's useful to hit a basic topic and just hear it explained from someone else, because I mean, to be honest, I used synthesizers for years without really understanding what a filter was, or an envelope, or an oscillator. I just turned knobs, made sounds. And so sometimes even just a basic review of something shined a light on something, and I walked away with something new. So I'm using the Elektron Analog Four. It is the small desktop version of the Analog Key, which is a full-size keyboard by Elektron. And it's a 4-voice synthesizer, and each voice is mono. And what I've started with initially is just the most basic, just tone, just the factory default tone. And what I'll be doing is shaping it a bit with a filter. And filters, so with subtractive synthesis, you start with this basic sound. Do we have 7/8? I see it on the LED.
Yeah.
I guess the house speakers aren't on. I'll try random sliders. Okay.
To get even more fundamental, it's difficult to actually get sounds to happen in the beginning.
Exactly. It's we were talking about this before the show. It's a type of Schrodinger's box or quantum physics that something behaves differently when it's observed. So if I'm alone in my studio, everything works, and I bring it here and people are watching, it just behaves differently. So it's just a C note, real basic tone. And with subtractive synthesis, you start with a sound like this, and then you take things away in order to shape it. And one of the ways that you take something away is through a filter. And when the filter is completely open like it is here, the whole sound goes through. And there's different types of filters, which I'll show. As you close the filter, the sound will get smaller and smaller based on what direction you're heading. This first filter is a low pass, meaning it allows the low end to go through and you start shaping off the top of it. Until it gets so low that it closes completely and the whole sound is gone. And then one of the things that runs with filters pretty consistently is resonance. And the resonance creates a peak at the frequency of the where the filter is. It creates a peak. And let's see if we can see this on the oscilloscope. So I'll be increasing the resonance, and you'll start to see these little sharper points go up, and you'll hear the change too. I'll do a different frequency. So I'm going to increase the resonance. So it's that higher, it's ridiculous to use the word resonant in explaining resonance, but it's that peak sound that comes up when you hear a filter. That high pitch is the resonance just jacking up that particular frequency. It raises the volume of that particular frequency. And then I took the resonance away so it becomes smoother again. So low-pass filters are used a lot in synthesis, particularly in techno and electronic music, in shaping bass sounds. And then I'm going to switch over to a high-pass filter. And what a high-pass does is it lets all the high through and then starts scraping off the bottom. And so when it's fully open, you'll hear the full tone. And then as the high-pass closes, it'll become thinner and thinner of a sound. So that's the basic sound. So now the bass is out. And it gets higher and higher until the whole sound has disappeared. And then...
Is there specific applications for...
That's a great question. A lot of times I use filters to shape up and clean up a sound when I'm doing mix downs. Some people use EQ, and a lot of times I'll use a filter, particularly if it's in a synth. And so there'll be a time where I'm playing something and the subs are too rumbly, either for the sound system or for what I'm trying to record, and I'll use a high-pass filter just to clean out those subs. So in this situation, if I just wanted a clean middle part, I would take out those subs, and what that does is that allows space for like a bass kick or a bass sound to play underneath of it, and it keeps the synth, the mid-range synth, high up and not getting muddy with your kick or your sub sound. Let's see. Chains off. So this is just a small sequence I programmed into the A4. It's just looping at different notes with this same synth. And I'll show you the high-pass filter. So it starts to sound almost like a radio, like a tinny radio. And then when I open the filter back up, you'll start to hear the bass again. You get those low ends. And then that same sound through the low-pass filter is what we started with. Only the lows come in first, just the bass sounds. So this is the low-pass filter. So you can get, and I turn the resonance up so those subs start coming up more. And so what that resonance is doing is it's amplifying the volume of the frequency at those low ends. So you can get this cool bass line, but it's still that pretty simple beat loop that I was just playing, but it's just the low part. And that's really what synthesis can do, is you isolate a cool part of this pretty basic sound, and all of a sudden it has this type of character and texture to it. And there's that. And then there's the original sound again. And so that's one of the ways that something simple can become something very characteristic or have a mood to it, is just grabbing a certain filter range. And then the last filter I'll show you is a band pass. And a band pass is a triangle, so it trims out the low and the high and peaks out just the range that you choose. And you'll be able to hear as I'll go through the range. It'll be just the low, then just the mids, then just the high. And so it's a tighter filter, and it allows even less through, and it has its own particular sound. So I'll start low, which sound, at this point, it sounds similar to the low pass filter, fairly closed. But now that I'm in the mid, it's cut out the bottom part. It's just playing the mid, and the top is cut out too. And now it's just, it's moved up to the high end, and it's just playing the high end and shaved off the total bottom. So that's just a basic overview of the main types of filters, which were low pass, let the low end through, high pass, which is the high end, and then the band pass, which is a targeted filter. So that is my Synth Basics on filters.
Awesome. Anyone have questions?
Yeah, I know it's a Synth Basic, and any questions or anything you have to add. I know there's different types of filters I didn't cover. I just want to cover the three basic ones.
I guess I was just thinking, like, when are you using these? Like, are you using all these filters, like, within a song on different synths?
Yep, so when I showed that low and bass one, I'll use that low pass filter and cut out most of the top in order to create my sub sounds or my bass sounds. And that'll be one synth track. And then on top of that, I'll do a mid synth sound. It could be something that's pretty or atmospheric or kind of a snarling, distorted mid synth. And for that, what I usually do is either the band pass filter, because I don't want the subs to conflict with my sub or kick sounds, and just have that snarl come through in the middle. And then the high end, high pass, sometimes I will use a high pass on my lead synth, but often I'll use a high pass filter in audio mixing to clean up a signal. And so if I've got hi-hats, which don't need any low end, sometimes a real high atmospheric sound, just like I'll cut out all the bass in, because the synth itself is going to want to send the full signal through, so I'll trim that out. And the idea in terms of audio mixing is, when I think of a mix in a song, I think of a room, a physical room, and that there's going to be a chair and a sofa and a table, and each piece of furniture is a sound. And what I do is I use EQs and filters to make sure each of those pieces of furniture aren't overlapping and stacking on top of each other. And if each object in the room has its own space, whether it's the low end, the medium, some high sounds, you can also use pan to separate in the room, or you can put like a reverb on something to make a sound up front or further back. I'll show you briefly. It really is, and that's what creates a clean mix. So this is the same sound with some reverb, so it's going to sound further away and more atmospheric. And then without the reverb, it's just a bit of a cleaner up front in your face sound, and as you put reverb, it pushes it to the back, and then other sounds without effects can be in the front. Yeah, it's a very physical modeling way to think of doing a mix. And that mental image has helped me a lot with mixes and keeping things from being muddy and overlapping.
So are you processing the same signal 3 different times when you go to the mix down? Like, are you sampling the same signal and then reprocessing it?
I often do that.
Filters?
I often use the same sound and process it in different ways because they'll automatically have a harmony with each other.
Yep.
Or I'll take the sound and pitch it down an octave, and that'll become my bass or my subnotes, and it'll have an echo or a harmony with my mids or my highs.
Okay.
And then I can use different types of filters on each one to clean up where it is in the space. Good
I
question.
like the room analogy. I've also heard the dresser analogy about
Yep.
put your socks in one drawer.
What's that? And can you share that with us?
Yeah, it's just the same with mixing for keeping, certain things in one shelf. So all your low end is on one shelf.
Got it.
The lower shelf, like your pants.
Yep.
Your high end is all your socks.
Nice.
Kind of like your furniture.
Got it.
So it's cool.
Shirts in the middle.
Yep.
Great. Any other questions on filters?
That's a kind of performance-based question.
Sure.
Do you use automation when you're out performing? To automate your parameters, some knob twists that that you're doing?
I often do, either through LFOs or with the A4, and I'm happy to show this to you afterwards. You can assign all these knobs to performance parameters. So one knob can control 5 different attributes to a synth. And so you could turn it and it opens up the filter, adds a reverb, increases the volume all in one turn. So that's useful with this particular one. And then I also work on different experimental technologies to control synthesizers with other inputs. So one, I've got a motion sensor system, so a dancer's movement controls the parameters on a synthesizer. Or I've also developed an EEG system where my thoughts can control a synthesizer without touching it. And it can be mapped to all sorts of different parameters. So those are different types of biosensors, being able to control parameters. That's a whole other experimental thing. Within the synth, LFOs are real good for automation or doing the performance assignments on the A4. And that's useful because to change everything at once during a show.
It's hard to have 4 hands. You
Yep.
control 4 knobs at once.
Yeah, and when I record, a lot of times I'll do a pass without recording everything, but I'll just record the MIDI, which I can run the MIDI out into something like Ableton, and then clean it up if I need to in Ableton, and then when I run it back, Ableton is what is doing all the MIDI changes on it, and I can focus on another synth or the drum machine or turning knobs that can't be automated like on an effects pedal. Yeah. Any other questions? Filters?
I've already forgotten how the voices play into this. You mentioned that this has 4.
It does have 4 voices, and I was just using one on this demo. But what was your question? Just that?
Well, yeah.
Where's the other 4?
Right.
Yep. Right now, this is just the basic preset, so they all... Those were all 4 voices. Each one you can shape into different things, and then, but just for this demo, I was using the first voice.
And I guess adding to that is the different voices will interact differently with the filter, because like a square wave has more harmonics than a triangle wave, so
Yep.
there's that interplay also. Yes.
If you're playing on multiple voices, I assume that particular unit can apply to the filter to only one or some of them. So
Each
that-
track has its own filter.
Right.
Was that the question? I jumped in.
Yes and no. Then, inversely, would you be able to use one filter to control all the different voices on that particular model?
You could set up each of the 4 filters identically, and then have a performance knob control them. And that performance knob would be linked to track 1 filter, track 2 filter, track 3 filter, track 4 filter. And as you turn it, they all open and close simultaneously. Or you could stagger them where they open slightly differently on the same knob. Yeah, that's a cool feature with the performance knobs on this piece. And a complete aside, I actually don't use this as a synthesizer much. I usually run external in. You can do external input on this, so you can run a sample into this, you can run a full track into this, or a different synth. And then I use this as almost like an effects box where I apply the filters and the effects to an external signal rather than the internal synth sounds. And that's just an aside, but that's how I mostly use the Analog Four, as a very expensive effects pedal.
When you're talking about automating with LFO, I think
Yep.
it's going just back and forth from like open to close
Yep.
in the filter. Do you also use subtractive synthesis on that LFO that's, or is it just kind of going up and down?
The LFO on this, and I don't want to take too much time from the other two demos, but the LFO can have different waveforms. It has a triangle, sine wave, which is a smooth up and down. It has square, just off, on, in terms of applying the effect that's on the LFO. A saw wave, exponential, ramp, and there's also a random one. And so the randomizer I often use if I want a kind of an organic, strange application to the LFO. So there's a good amount of things you can do with LFO, with the speed, the fade in, I think it's start phase, what it modulates, and then the actual waveform. So there's quite a bit you can do with it, and you can jack it up into like 5,000. The speed can go from like ×2 to ×5,000, where it becomes on this kind of grain sound. It's like, I won't get into that with this, but there's a lot you can do with the LFO to automate. And then on the Octatrack, which is a different machine by Elektron, you can draw your own LFO shapes, which could be useful if you want a very exact way that the LFO applies to the sound. But I promise I'll do an LFO demo for Synth Basics in the future. So,
Love it.
great. Anything else? All right, thank you.